Rigoberto, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Belfast as part of your visit to Ireland as European Director of ICAP. Would you perhaps like to begin by telling our viewers a bit about ICAP and its history and the part it plays in Cuban internationalism?
Afternoon, friend. It's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to extend our message to the people who will listen and watch this interview later on. So, ICAP is the acronym of Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples. It's a social organization, was created in 1960, at the end, December 30, as an organization that was able to receive, but also give back the solidarity and the samples of sympathy and recognition that the newborn Cuban Revolution was already receiving at that time. Our commander-in-chief, Fidel, realized that there were interest and expectations in many peoples of the world to know what was happening in Cuba. And that's why he created ICAP, as to be a representative of the people's, Cuban people, to show the reality that we were having at that time, the transformation process that was taking place, in order to explain and show the world opposed to what the media and the US governments have been always saying about Cuba. We know that it's information, this is distorted, manipulated. So that has been the role of ICAP for almost 65 years, which we are going to be next year, to show the world that the reality of Cuban people. And in that way, we organize brigades of solidarity. We organize groups who go to Cuba to see our achievements in terms of health, education, security, protection to the most vulnerable ones. They receive lectures of different topics about our history. They exchange with Cuban population, and they also do voluntary work in the fields. That's more or less what we do, what we have been doing for almost 6 decades, and establish links and bridges between the Cuban people and the different peoples of the world. Today, we have relations with more than 1,000 organizations of solidarity with Cuba in almost 150 countries of the world, in the 5 continents. So it's a potential, it's an opportunity that we see so that our voice may be heard and may be raised by Cuba's friends abroad, showing the world that what is happening in Cuba, what we are doing, what our policy is towards different issues of the world. And it's really one of the reasons that makes me to be here today. It's just to exchange with those friends of Cuba, to explain our priorities, to acknowledge everything they have been done for us for so many years, because as our national hero said, Cuba, since the very beginning, homeland is humanity. So we, as part of our principles, of part of the process that we have been transforming one in our country, not only for us, but also for others who may be also in need. And that's what makes me here to express our reality, but also to acknowledge everything that the Irish people have been doing for Cuba for so many years.
And I can assure you that people in Ireland are really grateful of everything that Cubans have done for the world and for internationalism and for solidarity and so on. Because I suppose your organization expresses the political philosophy of the revolution, that international cooperation and so on, but I suppose it exists at a practical level precisely because right from the outset there was an attempt to strangle or asphyxiate the revolution, and the United States coerced or encouraged a number of governments to be hostile to Cuba right from the outset. And I suppose ICAP, your institute, was there to engage with people at that kind of popular level, at base. And obviously the revolution itself has a kind of popular base, but you're also good at engaging with people at a kind of grassroots community level across the world, regardless of whether the government is left-wing or right-wing or anything else. And that's been a good way of circumventing or transcending that attempt to strangle the revolution and to starve you of support right from the outset. You've managed to maintain a very large organic body of support groups and solidarity groups across the whole planet.
That's the idea. That's the intention of also our work, because although we fully support the project and the revolution, we are not considered to be a state institution. That's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or any other entity really engaged directly with the governments of the world. Our role is mainly with the, as you say, with the population itself. I mean, with the groups, with the friends at the local level, at the community level. It's just to increase the links between our peoples, considering that there are many things that we have in common that we need to work or to promote. For example, values that may be common for any human being, no matter the system or the country or the party that may rule any place. So we need to work for the well-being of the human being. We need to promote peace, is also very important in today's world. The need to oppose, for example, any interference in the internal affairs of the countries or any decision making that may the peoples be more aware of, or in order to take more conscious about the needs that we have, the challenges that we face in today's world, so as to continue creating and working together for a future better one that we consider is not always possible, but is really a necessity in today's world. There are many challenges that we face together, and if we get together in order to work in favor of them, that would be a contribution to the new generations coming.
And thankfully, Cuba has led the way, really, for such a small island. It's had such a leading, significant role, both continentally across the Americas, but also at a world level. And as you've mentioned, the Cuban model is based on cooperation and respect and equality, whereas sadly we live in a world where that's yet to be realised at an international level because of the distortion, if you like, that imperialism forces upon the world. And I think some of the viewers will be aware already that every year at the UN General Assembly, the international community overwhelmingly votes in favour of Cuba and against the US and the continuation of the blockade. We're now down to solely Israel voting with the US and currently Ukraine abstaining, but every other country in the world votes with Cuba. And sadly, that should result in consequences for states that violate the will of the international community. But as Cubans know better than anyone else, at the moment, international law is a convenient fiction, if you like. So the likes of the United States and others will invoke a rules-based order and law and so on when it suits them, but violate the very same thing again and again and again as it suits their purposes. And I think Cuba, more than anyone else, has witnessed this right from the very start of the revolution. Notoriously, Lester D. Mallory, in his memorandum, said it publicly, said it out loud, that the whole purpose of the blockade is to produce hunger and desperation and the overthrow of government. Precisely because the United States knew it couldn't defeat the revolution politically, it's resorted to these coercive measures, all of which are illegal. There is no international law sanctioning or legalizing any of these measures. So perhaps you could tell our viewers a bit about the blockade itself, a torturous process of trying to asphyxiate Cuba and its revolution over 6 decades now, the effects of which are very, very live today and are having a really significant impact on the population of Cuba to this day.
Sadly for our people, because we have resisted and lived under the blockade policy by the US government, no matter if it is a Republican or Democrat. As you said, it was established in 1962, officially as a decree, as an approved, but it has been transforming this while time has passed by. We remember in the 90s, it was very hard after the collapse of the socialist European models, and they were all our first partners in terms of economic exchange, everything. New laws were also approved that make the blockade really a stronger one, because based on that concept that Cuban properties may be confiscated abroad, that giving the possibility to citizens in the US to establish some kind of demands in order to be able to recover those properties that were nationalized at the beginning of the revolution. They try to cut all possibilities for us to access to any international credits, organizations. The Helms-Burton Act in 1996, the Torricelli Act in 1992. So since the 90s, the blockade has always been there. Sometimes more aggressive, sometimes a little bit less, we could say, but our capacity of resistance and also to diversify our economy has been the issues that have made us to go over that blockade in order to develop our society. But it's truly that it is the main challenge for Cuba's development. It has been so for more than 6 decades. And very, I would say, opportunistic way, the Trump's administration very suddenly went back everything that we could advance during the last 2 years of Obama's administration, that you and all friends, all people who may be listening to this interview may know that we didn't have any diplomatic relations until Obama's government, in which both governments discussed and got into an agreement, and we are neighbors countries, so we share seas and waters, and there is a large Cuban community, families living in the US, and so we need to have the possibility to go on a table and sit together and discuss issues that may be for common interest. That was possible when Obama's government. So suddenly after he finished, then we came the Trump administration, and he decided he fulfilled what he promised. So, to reverse everything that was advanced with Obama's, but it coincided with the facing of the pandemic, COVID-19. So you know that it was really hard because we are a developing country. All our resources were put in order to control the pandemic, in order to make it with our own resources, our own efforts. We didn't have enough money so as to go abroad to buy any of the vaccines that were commercialized by the big entrepreneurial factories or companies that used to sell the vaccines, and we put our resources in order to develop with our own revolutionary science what we were able to do. I'm lucky that after 2 years more or less, we were able to vaccinate our own population fully with our own vaccines, and it was really a result of the development of the Cuban Revolution in the biotechnology field. It makes also coincided with the measures in terms of asphyxiating us economically, because Trump's applied more than 200 measures, additional ones to the blockade complex of laws or acts, for saying in a way, in which the results, the economic results, are still being reflected in our economy. We haven't been able to recover. Trump is not in office anymore, but after that it came Biden, that policy has been always or very similar to what Trump did. So it reflects, or it shows what we know, that it doesn't matter in the US if it is one party or the other one. They have very strong connections with the Cuban anti-Cuban groups, and that live in Miami, and they receive funds, and they provide all these kind of funds for them to try to restore the population's feeling against the government, and that's what he has been applied. I mean, what Mallory said in 1962 has been in a way trying to show, so that they know that the revolution and the process cannot be defeated by the arms. So that's why they need to create at the most difficult times for the people to live in There is a lack at this time. We have been lacking of fuel, electricity. Of course, this has an impact in almost all fields of the economy. Lack of medicines, lack of food, lack of means of transportation. So the whole things, all the combination of all these issues have been really aggravating the life and the daily life of the Cuban people. And that's what they are being pretending, so that the people blame the government for all the problems that we have, and then they go and oppose the government, so trying to defeat from inside the process we have been selecting, the process that make us to be proud of, let's say so, because if we go back to 1959, before, what was Cuba before the triumph of the revolution? We were like the backyard of the US. We were the place, Havana was the place where most of the people in the Miami who have some money, they used to go there for weekends, they used to go there for trafficking drugs, buying rum, and going to the casinos, and prostitution, and some other issues were really make us famous at that time, or well known. That's something that they cannot forgive or forget, I would say. And that's something that is hidden inside the U.S. administration, since they have always been us as part of the territory, because being so close, they need to have an influence not only in Cuba but also in Cuba, trying to get to the whole Latin America. And that's why more or less I would join this idea with the doctrine, Monroe Doctrine, which says America for Americans. So what America is, the place where they could have an influence, where they could make the peoples follow without any way to oppose what they want to do, or to be our region in terms of economic, in terms of politics. That's why Cuba's example is really a spine, which is hidden in the throat, because we have developed a different model. We have, with our own very limited resources, we have been able to youth people from different parts of the world to become professionals in Cuba, given scholarships based on the result that we have achieved in education and healthcare. And they have graduated, and they have returned into their own countries to pay services to the whole population. That's why we created, even in the most difficult times of the special period, in the crisis in the 90s, the Latin American School of Medicine, which was a very important project for the youth from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia. They went to Cuba and they went study free of charge, and they became professionals in doctors and nurses. Similar ways happen with physical education and training, sports, other fields in which they go. Cuban doctors have been always going to some other parts where it is really needed, after earthquake, after hurricanes, after the natural disaster, to pay voluntarily what we know, because we consider that we do not give what we have enough. In fact, we don't have nothing enough, but we share what we have, and those are feelings, those are principles that make us a little bit different in today's world, and we consider that those things need to be done. There are many challenges in the world. There are many issues that should make human beings to be more united in order to overcome difficulties, in order to preserve peace, and some other aspects. That's why Cuba is considered to be like sometimes the devil, because we don't follow the patterns, and we are proud in every United Nations resolutions when we receive the overwhelming support of the governments of the world in our just, a fair cause in order to the blockade to be lifted. But unfortunately, it just happens in that multilateral forum. Then it doesn't mean that the United Nations is going to eliminate the blockade. So we are conscious that with the support of the international community, our friends in the world, they need to continue pushing and pushing so that the U.S. Governments, authorities may understand that there is Obama did it. In fact, he recognized that there was a policy that was obsolete, that it didn't get the results that we were expecting for, and they tried to change it. Not the methods, I would say, the methods, not the goal, but the methods. But we were able to face the challenge because in that period, favoring the trips of Americans to go to Cuba, it was had an impact in the numbers of tourism that we received. So the exchange, from the cultural point of view, from the academic point of view, those are things that benefit both countries. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen anymore. We will continue resisting, but we are not arms crossed. Our country, our government is really trying with our own resources, which are very limited, to make it more, trying to overcome the situation that we are going through and make the life of people a little bit more comfortable in terms of, though some measures are being taken for example, to provide more decision making to the governments at the local level, so that the resources that may be distributed and allocated to the fields that where they are really most needed at this time. Try to increase the national production so as to diminish the amount of food or items that we need to import from abroad. Given the private sector, the new emerging private sector, some more capacities, as well as the socialist enterprises that to broaden the social objects, the things that they could be able to do, so as to link the private with the state one, and the process may be a little bit smoother for the population. Those are things that are being taking place nowadays. Those are measures. We are trying to diversify our markets, our partners economically, and those are things that are getting some results. But of course, the blockade is there. It has an impact, and mainly not at present, very negative impact, the inclusion of Cuba in the so-called list of the U.S., arbitrary list of the U.S. State Departments of countries who do not support their struggle against terrorism. It is something that is really having a very negative effects on our economy. You're going to make any transaction, any foreign through a bank, just for the word Cuba to be in the paper that you are able to fulfill, it is refused, it is denied. It has made many Cuba's friends all over the world to impulse what they are calling 1 cent for Cuba campaign. It is to show that the banks are fulfilling the U.S. instructions in order to blockade Cuba. It shows us here in Europe, here in this part of the world, it is very easy to see the extraterritorial effects of the blockade, because if they try to say or to show that it is a bilateral issue between them and us, nothing like that. It really has an impact on the third parties, and mainly in Europe. We remember, very sad, but remember during the COVID period that we tried to fulfill or to buy the respirators, lung respirators for the patients, and it was a company in Switzerland. They refused to sell it at the moment when we most needed, and they just showed that it's impossible. It was not possible due to the blockade effects. So our friends of Cuba in the world has been taking these elements in order to show in Europe that and to also to call the government's attention, because if something needs to be done, they are being victims. The rights of the citizens are being violated in order to by a policy that was not established by any of the governments here. One of the most recent cases is also the electronic system for travel authorization. That is most of the European citizens, when going to the US, they don't need a visa, and they just apply for a procedure online. So now, very silently, since some months ago, if you go to Cuba, then you cannot apply for that system, and you have to go to a US embassy to apply for a visa physically, fulfilling the requirements. It's something that has been silently putting into practice here in Europe and some other parts of the world, but it's having a very negative impact in our tourism because most of the countries, European citizens are generally, after Canada and the Cuban community who live in the US, then the third sources of incomes from the tourist sector comes from this area. So, but they have diminished the amount of people traveling to Cuba because it's very easy to have a family or a relative in the US or any possible business, and if you go there just to explore something, then you are putting in risk something that is maybe already established. So things like this, very difficult, are taking place in the policy of USA with Cuba nowadays. So I take advantage of this opportunity to denounce, but also to explain, because most of these things are not known by the majority of the population. Along with the blockade is also what we call media campaigns against Cuba. Not one, many media campaigns trying to maximize any of the mistakes that we may have, any of the issues that may happen in the country, but also trying to diminish any of every of the achievements that we may have, because we have them in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of social security, in terms of sports. We have some achievements that make us to be proud of, and they try to diminish those, but also reflect, or in a bigger position, some of the other issues that really, in order to distort the image of the revolution all over the world, to diminish the support of the people with that process. And that's why these actions like this are really important, and we appreciate it because they allow us to give us the possibility to transmit to a number of people that Cuba's reality. Well, we used to say that we are not a perfect society. I think that non-human play or result of the humans is, but we haven't been able to achieve everything that we were expected or planned for due to the hostility of the US policy towards Cuba, which has been always present since the triumph of the revolution, with some different aspects, but they have always been there and being the main obstacle for our development.
Precisely, and what you've just told us is a very welcome demythologization of the United States and its self-image, or that notion that its place in the world is as the bearer of rights and democracy and freedom and so on. The blockade has been, to all intents and purposes, a collective punishment, if you like, visited upon the Cuban people precisely because they've chosen to defend their own sovereignty and to pursue their own path in the world. And I think if anybody was under any doubts about who's in the right and who's in the wrong, as you've signaled to us during the pandemic, when Cuba saw people suffering elsewhere in the world, despite the fact that you were also in difficulties on your own island, you sent international brigades to help alleviate that suffering. Whereas when the United States saw that suffering in the world, it saw it as an opportunity to inflict even more suffering, not just upon Cubans, but it also threatened other countries that were looking to cooperate with you and the medical brigades and so on, just as surely as it sought to deny you the medical equipment necessary to help your own population. And that's, I guess, one thing about those actions of the United States, that the blockade is a collective punishment of a civilian population. That should be a crime under international law. Indeed it is. It's just that at the moment the international community doesn't seem to have the mechanisms, the United Nations doesn't seem to have the mechanisms to correct that and to enforce international law properly and fairly and equally. So in terms of the world that might be emerging, Cuba is playing quite a leading role in multilateralism or multipolarity, or whatever term people want to use for it. Cuba has recently led the G77 countries, which is an attempt to align most of the world in terms of, cooperation and trade on the basis of respect and mutual benefit and so on. If you'd like to tell us maybe something about that and what you see as the potential of that, because in its own way, I suppose it does offer the possibility of decentering the world economy, decentering the dollar and that reach, that financial reach that so underpins the blockade and the United States' capacity to intervene in the financial sector, the banking sector, to attack businesses that want to trade with Cuba, and so on. What possibilities you see emerging out of multilateralism, multipolarity?
Mm-hmm. We see a lot of potentials in those, because today's world is not the one we have 20, 30, 40 years ago. So new countries are emerging, new association or a grouping of countries, new blocks of power have been emerging. For example, the BRICS, and in Latin America there are many examples, like CELAC or UNASUR or ALBA. So those kind of integrations make us to reflect on the potentials that we may have together in order to solve the situation of one peoples or another based on the possibilities that we have among ourselves. I mean, there is a large community of countries, call it in the Global South or the South-South cooperation. So different terms have been used in order to make wider opportunities for this kind of the world, which is not the North. And we see it as a potential for cooperation. I mean, these kind of processes make us to understand and to reflect that the order that has been imposed for so many years is not a fair one. There is a group of people, a group of countries where most of the population is, where they live, where they face economic issues, where they face challenges in terms of environment because of the climate change and the rising of the sea levels and etc. That if we put all these efforts together, we would be in a better position so as to deal with that. And that's what Cuba considers appropriate in today's world. That's why we were, last year, we were the president of the 77 plus China group. There was a summit in Havana in September last year, which was a very productive one. All these expertise that we have get in our ways to prepare in order to face climate issues has been also put into the favor of other countries to belong to this kind of initiative. For example, in the Caribbean states, which are small islands very vulnerable to the issues regarding the climate change and the hurricanes and etc. So there are different mechanisms that we think that we need to improve, that we need to cooperate with the others, and that's what Cuba's example has been doing. No? That's why we consider that it's important to have a balance, in today's world. It's not just European Union or the US. So there are other actors, there are other countries with potentially, not only politically, but also economically. All these may be together in order to have conscious of the people's problems and being able to solve them step by step. That's what we are promoting. That's what we have been reflecting on this and putting into practice the expertise that we have in some fields, sharing it with others. For example, the agreements between Cuba and Venezuela and the ALBA TCP, in which cooperation was compensated, in which Cuban doctors used to work in many countries in Latin America. They used to have a miracle operation in which they used to have a surgery from the eyes to people who really needed it, first in Cuba and then in their own countries. And then we put our professionals to do this with some countries, and they used to compensate that efforts with some oil or some other resources that we may need. So experiences like this are important to be considered, because if we in the South share more or less the same problems, the same difficulties, we get together in things like this maybe give a better result for the life, because sometimes the policies are applied are not just for the governments, are the peoples the one who suffer the most, or the one who may be the benefited or not. So we need to think about the peoples as the center of the processes, and that's what Cuba's role has been practiced and explained in order to increase this kind of cooperation south-south bigger.
I suppose Cuba's success at the United Nations and the fact that most of the international community are with you and on your side in part explains that media war or hybridized warfare, whatever term you want to use for it, all the lies, all the misinformation. And the premise of that seems to be that the United States, or indeed some European countries, have a monopoly on what democracy is, whereas Cuba shows that there are actually other ways of understanding what that means and other ways of doing democracy, as it were. So again, you're being punished for a good example, as it were, rather than for your failures. But in terms of that misinformation and that kind of hybridized war against Cuba, I think people might be curious about that designation in regards to terrorism, precisely because it's just mythological, it's fantasy. There's absolutely no evidential basis for that fiction that the United States has come up with. In addition to it just being factually wrong, it's also morally wrong, reprehensible, and downright insulting, just in the sense that the United States has itself facilitated, funded, actively participated in terrorism against Cuba and its people, including the downing of civilian airlines, the bombing of hotels, and so on. That, you know, the level of hypocrisy and arrogance necessary to think they're in a moral position to judge what terrorism is, particularly when it comes to Cuba. The United States has itself been guilty of acts of terror again and again and again.
We share, like you say, it's really a contradiction. It is, because you cannot be a country which do not support in their struggle against terrorism when they have been. Just look back at the history, and we all know how many wars they have been involved with, how many conflicts they have been involved with. So it's in our case, as you said, there are many issues, in facts, in the Cuban history that show us that we have been victims of terrorism more than maybe many other countries in the world. Cuban people have been suffer a lot. They have introduced illnesses of animals in our animals, so that they have an impact from the economically. The plane that you said in 1976, flying from Barbados to Cuba with the national team of fencing and some others, it was just exploded due to a bomb. All of them died. In the 90s, many bombs were put into hotels in Havana in order to discourage the tourism to the island, and it was one of them ended with the death of one of Italian tourists who died in Copacabana Hotel. So many examples show that Cuban history is the result of terrorist actions against a country that has spread. More than 3,000 Cubans has died as a result of actions like this. We call it them victims of terrorism against the Cuba's revolution, and that's what it doesn't matter. We are victims, we know that, but at the same time, we are included along with North Korea, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, in the list that they say those countries do not support the U.S. efforts to combat terrorism. In the very beginning, when Trump was finishing, that he included us in the list, the pretext was that there was in Cuba part of the members of the Revolutionary Army of Colombia, that we were acting as guarantors, as well as Norway and some other countries, and they were in Cuba, and when they were claimed for the government of Colombia, we didn't give the right of them to go to Colombia to fulfill the request of the government. Those is a very simple way to judge a phenomenon, because it was part of international agreements in which if you are guarantor of that process, you have to respect what both parts agreed. The government in Colombia changed. Now it's not that possibility anymore. Most of them have returned. They don't have that pretext, but we still are still in the same list. So it's a way of manipulating the international public opinion. It's a way to continue having us, because they know that what the blockade can do from one side is reinforced, and it has really very negative consequences for Cuban economy to be in the list, because there is no bank who wants to do any transaction with Cuba. Any businessman who goes there just to explore possibility of investment, when they go and they see the risks that they are going to face, most of them give the back and go back. So friends of Cuba, when after the COVID or after some incidents, for example, the collapse of the hotel in Havana 2 years ago, or the born in the super tanqueros basement in Matanzas, they want to send some money in order to restore, helping to recover the area. All those donations are refused. The salary of those who work abroad, they cannot be remitted to Cuba because the bank is denied any operations. So it's really one of the issues that we consider has to be called more attention on this, because while the blockade needs to be, in order to be lifted, needs to have the approval of the Congress of the US, which do not depend on one person but many others. Being in the list is just ratified or not by the President of the US. So we need that more pressure needs to be done by our friends, by the governments, any who can support us in this struggle, which is nothing else than defending our self-determination rights, our position to be an independent island, to continue being, and not to, as I said before, go back to what we were before 1959.
And I hope that people watching will have a look at their own history in Ireland, and the fact that we are a relatively small island who found ourselves off the shore of a huge, powerful empire that tried to use starvation and hunger as weapons of war. That Cuba itself finds itself on the shore of the biggest, most powerful empire that's ever existed, and it's utterly remarkable that the revolution has held on and has kept advancing over more than 6 decades now, despite the sustained, unrelenting daily attack. There is no other example in the world of a small country being able to sustain itself against such a powerful foe. And I guess in terms of that powerful foe and this hypocrisy that we've observed, this capacity of a perpetrator to represent itself as a victim, the violator of human rights and international law masquerading as its defender, there's no other issue around, in addition to places like Cuba, that best distills that in Palestine right now. And I'm sure you want to say something about that, just because there are such close, deep links between Cuba and Palestine too. Because again, that is a very clear example of the apparent policemen of the world, if you like, are in fact bad cops, if you like. They're kind of corrupt, bad, violent, murderous cops.
I remember now, last year, November 16, 17, where the Friends of Cuba inside the European Parliament decided to organize a tribunal against the blockade. We were invited, we supported the idea because we think it was important at that time in that place where many anti-Cuban resolutions have been passed by the right-wing representative of the forces who are in the European Parliament. I remember when the group of judges were starting the process, none of them was Cuban. All of them were Europeans from different countries, and they decided to involve in a process like this so as to show the attention of the governments of the European Union about the extraterritorial character of the blockade and what it needs to be opposed by at the national levels. No? They used to introduce the process, saying that in the particular moment in which it was taking place, in which there were the genocide that was taking place in Palestine, but at the same time, based on this, they try to compare both issues. I mean, the Palestinian and the Cuba's cause against the blockade. They say the difference is that in the case of Palestine, the bombs are falling down a population and killing them just in a moment. In the case of Cuba, the blockade, we could say, is a war, economic war, where the bombs are throwing silently, and the death of the population is not just at the moment, but while time passes by. It's important to think about this and also to reflect about Palestinian people. We, as a country, we have a very well-defined policy, not now, but it has been kept for many years. It's a people that needs to have the right to be respected about the land that they have. It's a cause that we have supported. There are many Palestinian students who have graduated in Cuba as doctors and teachers, engineers. So we have a special program of scholarships for this country. They are very well students. They go there and they explain and they get the good results and they prepare and they go back into the country in order to help the people and in the different issues that they have been facing for. You know, when the bombs throw, it doesn't say if it is going to a hospital or a military base or any other aspect. So, and we have seen in this month, since October 7 last year, that many of the citizens who have died are civilians, are children, are women, are ancient people. It's a cause that we feel like us. That's the reason why Cuba, Fidel decided not to have any diplomatic relations with Israel, and we have maintained it. Today is the only country we don't have any diplomatic relations, the international community. We don't support that kind of aggressiveness because always proclaim that the system of two states, so that's a position that we defend, and we think that both should have their own issues, but if something needs to be respected, it's life, is the human being, is the civilians ones. So Palestinian, as well as some other causes in the world, we used to call it the fair causes of the peoples, and we used to defend it like ours because we consider as a priority. We consider they have the right to exist, that people has been exploited for many years by the government, and what it is really Israel one, what is really happening today is something that should be a shame for humanity. It has no sense that in today's world, 21st century, so many civilians have been killed. The international community has remained almost silent despite the demonstrations by the peoples in different parts of the world. In many capitals, there has been huge demonstrations, and you see the flags rising. That's not enough. That's not enough. Why that huge human mass is being massacred, and it's a shame for humanity. That's why we feel it like if we were our own blood, the one that is being raised in that scenario. So all our solidarity with that people who has been suffering a lot, but they deserve peace to continue as a country and as a people.
Well, thank you so much for your humanitarianism and your solidarity. People feel that very genuinely in Palestine. They certainly feel it in Ireland, just as they felt it in Pakistan after earthquakes and so on, just as they felt it when they were fighting apartheid in Southern Africa or liberating Namibia. All around the world for various reasons, whether it's Cubans having to shed their blood, whether they're arriving with their medical training. Cuba has fought for humanity and for the betterment of all peoples. So, and you're here as a representative of all of that. So given that you're with us in Ireland, I'll say to you in Irish, Gura mila magat, muchísimas gracias in your own language. Thank you so much.
It's our duty. Thank you, because that's what we are like. You know, that's the things that we make us to be, I would say, a distinctive people in today's world. So we come here just to approach and also to explain our friends like you and the ones who may see the program later, these kind of issues that make us to be proud of, that make us to be different, but to continue saying that Cuba will be following the route that we have selected and supported by most of the population, without denying to any of the principles, because if we have been reached so far, so we can continue being the beacon and alternative for the world that we believe should be from now on. So it's always my duty to acknowledge our friends in Ireland and some other countries here in Europe and the rest of the world for supporting Cuba, which is a fair cost too. Thank you.